My wife died. Heartbroken that Corinne chose planes over family, she chose a cubicle over her own mother's deathbed. That's what my father said. Into a microphone, in front of 70 people who came to mourn my mother. I was sitting in the third row, charcoal suit, hands folded, the small gray pin on my lapel catching the overhead light just enough to look like nothing. I tasted copper, that metallic flood at the back of your throat when your body decides between fight and flight, and you choose neither. You choose stillness, because stillness is the only thing they can't take from you. My name is Corinne Blackwell. I'm 42 years old, and up until 9 seconds ago, I was a daughter grieving her mother in a chapel that smelled like lilies and damp earth and furniture polish. Now I'm the woman 70 pairs of eyes just convicted without a trial. Wendell Blackwell gripped both sides of that podium like he was steering a ship through a storm only he could see. His voice didn't crack. His hands didn't shake. He'd rehearsed this. I could tell by the way he paused after deathbed. He let the words sit in the room like smoke. He wanted it to settle into people's lungs. I didn't flinch. I stayed silent. The room shifted, not toward me, away from me. My cousin Janet Johnson leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her program. Aunt Diane Smith pressed her lips together and shook her head slowly, the way people do when they've already made up their minds and want you to know it. My Uncle Robert lifted his chin in my direction, just barely, the smallest gesture of confirmed suspicion. They'd been prepared for this. Wendell had spent 2 years preparing them. Denial, I would learn, was Wendell Blackwell's specialty. If you've ever been underestimated by people who don't know the real story, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me go back, because you need to understand what silence costs before you can understand what it's worth. I commissioned through the Air Force Academy in 2004. 20 years ago. I was the intense child, too curious, too quiet, too precise. Wendell never understood precision in a daughter. He understood it in a torque wrench. He understood it in a turbine blade alignment. But in a girl who wanted to fly, precision looked like defiance. He was a mechanic. 40 years on the commercial line. He could rebuild a CFM56 engine blindfolded. I never once questioned his skill, but Wendell Blackwell believed with absolute certainty that women did not belong in cockpits. Not commercial cockpits. Not military cockpits. Not any cockpit. Women belonged in the terminal. Women belonged answering phones. Women belonged on the ground. When I told him I'd been accepted to the academy, he set his coffee mug down on the kitchen counter and said 4 words. "You'll wash out." I didn't wash out. I graduated. I earned my wings. I logged my first 1,000 hours before I turned 28. But Wendell never asked about any of it. Not once. He asked about the weather in Colorado Springs. He asked if I was eating enough. He never once asked what I flew. Growing up in the Blackwell household meant earning affection like rent, and the rent was always higher for me than it was for anyone else. By 2014, I'd logged over 2,000 flight hours. I'd married Major Thomas Miller. Tom was a good man. Steady hands, quiet laugh. He died in a training accident that same year. The Air Force sent a chaplain to my quarters at 0600. I opened the door, and I knew before he spoke. Wendell came to the funeral. He sat in the back. He left before the flag was folded. He told my mother later that Tom's death was proof that flying kills everything it touches. My mother told me this on the phone 3 weeks later. Her voice was careful, measured, like she was reading from a script she'd written to protect us both. Mom knew things. She always knew things. In 2018, I was selected for a program I cannot name in full. What I can tell you is that it involved experimental airframes, scramjet propulsion, speeds exceeding Mach 5, the kind of flying where the sky turns black and the horizon curves and your body weighs 7 times what it should, and the thermal soak on the airframe reaches temperatures that would melt the bolts. Wendell spent his career tightening. I was one of 2 pilots chosen. The other was Major David Wright. We flew out of Edwards Air Force Base under a classification stamp so heavy that my official records were scrubbed, my photos were restricted, and my name was removed from every public database the Air Force maintained. To the world, I became an aviation safety consultant, a woman with a business card and a DC, address, and nothing interesting to say at dinner parties. To my family, I became even less than that. Some clients prefer discretion. That's what I told them. Every holiday, every phone call, every time Wendell asked me what exactly I did all day, that was so important I couldn't come home. I work in analysis, Dad. We analyze things. Sometimes the data is just quiet. He hated that answer. He hated it because he couldn't break it open. And what Wendell couldn't break open, he rebuilt into something he could. So he rebuilt me. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd rewritten me. Wendell told the Smiths I'd failed out of flight school. He told the Johnsons I'd taken a desk job to save face. He told anyone who'd listen that his daughter was a glorified flight attendant, a fraud playing soldier in a DC cubicle, a woman who pushed papers for the real pilots. He had crafted this story carefully. And when my mother was diagnosed 2 years ago, the story became a weapon. Mom had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was 8 months. She got 11. I flew home 7 times during those 11 months. 7 times. Each visit required a classified travel authorization, a cover itinerary filed through a cutout firm, and a 72-hour window that started closing the moment I landed. Wendell saw a daughter who showed up for 2 days and disappeared. He saw a woman who chose a cubicle over her own mother. He told the hospice nurses. He told the neighbors. He told my mother's church group. What he didn't know, what I could never explain, was that on 3 of those visits, I'd flown in directly from a test facility where I'd pushed an experimental airframe to Mach 5.7 at the edge of the atmosphere. Landed, showered the flight sweat off in a locker room that smelled like hydraulic fluid and recycled air, and driven straight to the airport in civilian clothes with the taste of oxygen mask rubber still on my lips. He didn't know that. Nobody did. Except Mom. Mom knew. I never told her the details. I never said classified or scramjet or Edwards. But she knew the way mothers know. She heard it in the pauses. She felt it in the way I held her hand, with fingers that still ached from gripping a flight stick at 7 Gs. She looked at the thin scar along my jawline, the one from a canopy failure during a high G test, and she never asked how I got it. She just touched it once, gently, and said, "You're still flying." It wasn't a question. I said nothing. She smiled. That was the last real conversation we had. 3 weeks before the chapel. 3 weeks before the lilies and the damp earth and Wendell's podium. The memorial was held at First Lutheran on Maple Street. October. The air outside was cold and sharp, the kind of autumn air that makes your lungs ache if you breathe in too fast. Inside, the chapel was warm with bodies and candle flame, and the sound of people who thought they knew my mother better than I did. Wendell wore his best suit, gray, a pin on his lapel from the Airline Mechanics Association. 40 years of service. He touched it twice before he stepped up to speak. I noticed because I notice everything. That's what 20 years of flight instrumentation does to your eyes. You read gauges. You read rooms. The data is always there if you're trained to see it. He opened with a story about their first date. The room laughed softly. He talked about her garden, her apple pie, her devotion to the church. Every word was true. Every word was aimed. Because when he turned to the subject of children, the trajectory shifted. Susan gave everything to this family, he said. She gave everything. And some people in this family gave nothing back. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. My wife died heartbroken, he continued. And now his voice dropped into that low register he saved for authority. That Corinne chose planes over family. The candle flame on the altar seemed to hesitate. She chose a cubicle over her own mother's deathbed. She chose business trips over holding her mother's hand. And I will not stand here and pretend that didn't break Susan's heart. Because it did. 70 people in that chapel. Not one of them looked at me with anything but contempt. Janet Johnson shook her head. Uncle Robert crossed his arms. Diane Smith closed her eyes like she was praying for my soul. I folded my napkin. No, there was no napkin. I folded my hands. I placed them in my lap. My fingers were perfectly still. The scar along my jaw caught the light from the stained glass window above us, and I let it. I didn't cover it. I didn't touch it. They thought silence meant guilt. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that beneath my charcoal suit, folded into the lining of my garment bag in the trunk of my rental car, was a flight suit with a classification patch that would make Wendell's 40-year service pin look like a participation ribbon. They don't know that yet. The service ended. People filed out in clusters, touching Wendell's arm, squeezing his hand, murmuring about strength and loss, and what a good man he was. Nobody touched me. Nobody squeezed my hand. I walked through that crowd like a ghost in a charcoal suit, the gray pin on my lapel invisible to everyone who'd already decided what I was. The parking lot smelled like wet leaves and exhaust. The sky was the color of steel wool. I was reaching for my car door when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, purposeful, not hostile. Ms. Blackwell. I turned. A woman. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back, scrubs visible beneath an open jacket. She was holding a cream-colored envelope in both hands, the way you hold something that might shatter. I'm Sarah Hall. I was your mother's hospice nurse, her primary nurse, the last 11 months. I waited. Your mother dictated this to me. In her final week, she made me promise I'd put it directly in your hands, not your father's, not mailed. Yours. She extended the envelope. My name was written across the front in handwriting that wasn't my mother's. It was too steady, too careful. Sarah's handwriting, taking dictation from a woman whose hands could no longer hold a pen. I took it. The paper was heavy, cream stock, sealed with a simple adhesive flap. She talked about you, Sarah said quietly. More than anyone. She was proud of you in a way I'd never seen a mother be proud. She said you'd understand what she couldn't say out loud. I held the envelope against my chest. I didn't open it. Not there. Not in that parking lot with the wet leaves and the steel wool sky and the sound of Wendell's voice still ringing in the chapel behind me. Thank you, Sarah. She nodded. She turned. She walked away. I sat in my rental car for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard the way I watch instrument panels. Steady, precise, counting. Then I opened it. The letter was 3 pages. I read every word. My hands did not shake. My eyes did not blur. I read it the way I read pre-flight checklists, deliberately, completely. And the last line, written in Sarah Hall's steady hand but spoken in my mother's voice, read, "Never stop flying, my sparrow." I folded the letter along its original creases. I placed it back inside the envelope. I placed the envelope inside the breast pocket of my charcoal suit, directly over my heart, directly behind the small gray pin that nobody in that chapel had thought to look at twice. Then I started the engine. Behind me, through the rearview mirror, I could see Wendell standing on the chapel steps, surrounded by the Smiths and the Johnsons, accepting condolences he'd weaponized. Tomorrow, he'd tell them I left without saying goodbye. He'd tell them I didn't cry. He'd tell them I was cold and distant and proof of everything he'd been saying for 2 years. What he wouldn't tell them, because he didn't know, was that 6 months from now, he'd be sitting in a folding chair at a dedication ceremony, watching a 2-star general salute his daughter. But not tonight. Tonight, I drove to the airport in silence, the letter pressed against my chest, the taste of copper fading from my mouth, replaced by something quieter. Something that felt like altitude. Silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the weight of what people think they know about you, pressed down so hard it squeezes the breath out of your own truth. That was the last time I let Wendell Blackwell define me. 6 months passed. Not quickly. 6 months never pass quickly when you're carrying a letter in your breast pocket and a lie on your back. I flew 9 test missions in those 6 months. 3 of them pushed the Dark Star prototype past Mach 5.2. One of them, the Pacific Trials sortie in February, took me to the edge of the mesosphere at a velocity that turned the cockpit glass amber from thermal soak. The airframe held. The scramjet ignition sequence held. I held. My hands on the stick, my spine compressed under 7 Gs, the horizon curving beneath me like the earth was showing me its spine. Nobody in the Blackwell family knew about any of it. To them, I was still the woman who left the memorial without crying, still the safety consultant, still the daughter who pushed papers in a DC cubicle while her mother died. Wendell had spent those 6 months reinforcing the story. I know because Janet Johnson called me once, in March, to tell me that Wendell had shared some concerns with the family about my mental state. She said the word concerns, the way people say tumor, carefully, with pity already baked in. He thinks you might be making things up, Corinne, about your work, about why you couldn't be there more. I said nothing. He says you never actually flew. He says you failed out of flight school and took a desk job to save face. I adjusted the phone against my ear. Outside my window at Edwards, a pair of F-16s were taxiing toward the runway in formation. I could hear their engines through the glass, that low, rolling thunder that shakes the floor before it shakes the sky. I work in analysis, Janet. Some clients prefer discretion. She sighed. The sigh of a woman who had already chosen a side. That was it. That was the last time I explained anything to anyone in that family. Then came the invitation. The Blackwell Regional Hangar dedication. A ceremony at the regional airport 15 miles from the house I grew up in. The printed invitation arrived at my DC cover address in a stiff white envelope with the airport authority's seal embossed in navy blue. The hangar was being named in recognition of outstanding contributions to American aviation. Wendell thought it was for him. 40 years turning wrenches on commercial turbines. He'd told the family. He'd told the neighbors. He'd told his buddies from the Airline Mechanics Association. Wendell Blackwell, finally getting the recognition he deserved. What he didn't know, what the airport authority hadn't yet publicly released, was that the dedication had been coordinated through the Air Force Test Center at Edwards. The hangar wasn't being named for a mechanic. It was being named for a unit, a classified unit, my unit. The ceremony was scheduled for April, a Saturday. Clear skies, 62 degrees, the kind of spring morning that makes everything look scrubbed clean, like the world decided to start over. I arrived at 0900 in a charcoal coat over a simple black dress, sleeves to the elbow, the scar along my jawline visible in the morning light, and the small matte gray pin on my lapel, the one shaped like a simplified bird in flight, the one that most people dismissed without a second glance, the sparrow pin. Only 7 pilots in the history of the United States Air Force have earned that pin. It is awarded to pilots who have successfully maintained controlled flight above Mach 5 in an experimental airframe. There is no public registry. There is no ceremony photograph. There is only the pin itself, matte gray, no larger than a thumbnail, and the knowledge that you earned it at the edge of where the sky stops being sky and starts being space. I wore it the way I always wore it, quietly. The hangar was enormous, polished concrete floor, steel rafters arching overhead like the ribs of something ancient. Folding chairs arranged in rows facing a temporary stage draped in blue and white bunting. An American flag hung from the rafters, perfectly still in the windless interior. Wendell was already there, center of the front row, gray suit, his Airline Mechanics Association pin polished to a shine. He was leaning toward my Uncle Robert, gesturing broadly, explaining something with the confidence of a man who believed every seat in that hangar had been arranged for him. The Smiths occupied the second row. The Johnsons filled the third. Janet sat with her arms crossed, scanning the crowd with the territorial awareness of someone guarding a perimeter she didn't realize had already been breached. I entered from the east side door. I didn't approach the family section. I took a seat near the back, 3 rows from the rear wall, next to an empty chair. I crossed my ankles. I folded my hands in my lap. Nobody greeted me. Diane Smith glanced in my direction, then looked away. Janet leaned toward her husband and whispered. Uncle Robert didn't turn around at all. They'd been prepared for this, too. Wendell had made sure of it. I sat there for 4 minutes, quiet, still, reading the room the way I read instrument panels. The data was everywhere. Then the east door opened again. 2 men entered. The first was Major David Wright, 38. Lean. Square jaw. Dress blues pressed so sharp the creases could cut glass. He carried a slim leather folder under his left arm and walked with the cadence of a man who measured distance in flight hours, not footsteps. The second man stopped the room. Major General Marcus Reed, 2 stars on each shoulder. Dress blues heavy with ribbons, 6 rows deep, more color on his chest than most people see in a lifetime. Silver hair cropped close, posture that made the steel rafters above him look casual by comparison. He was tall, not in a way that crowded a room, in a way that reorganized it. They walked down the center aisle. Every head turned. Wendell straightened in his chair, the way civilians do when they sense rank they can't identify, but instinctively respect. General Reed's gaze swept the room, measured, unhurried. The gaze of a man who had commanded flight operations across 3 continents and had learned long ago that the most important thing in any room is the thing nobody's looking at. His eyes found me. They didn't skim past. They stopped. They held. Then they dropped, just for a half second, to the small gray pin on my lapel. His expression didn't change, not visibly, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recognition, a calibration, the micro-adjustment of a man confirming coordinates he already knew were correct. He continued walking. He reached the front of the hangar. He shook hands with the airport director. He nodded to the mayor. He did not approach Wendell Blackwell. Wendell noticed. I could see it in the way his shoulders tightened. He'd expected to be the first handshake, the center of gravity. Instead, the two-star general had walked past him like he was a folding chair. Major Wright took a position near the stage. General Reed stepped behind the podium. The microphone hummed to life. Good morning. I'm Major General Marcus Reed, commander of the Air Force Test Center at Edwards Air Force Base. The room went still. Wendell's chin lifted. His eyes narrowed. He was recalculating. I could see the math happening behind his expression. The slow realization that this ceremony might not be shaped the way he'd assumed. We're here today to dedicate this facility in recognition of a program and the personnel who made it possible. A program that, until recently, carried a classification stamp that prevented any public acknowledgement of the men and women who risked their lives to advance American aerospace capability. Wendell glanced at Uncle Robert. Robert shrugged. Before I continue, General Reed said, I'd like to acknowledge someone in this room. He paused. The pause was precise, not dramatic, operational. The kind of pause that precedes a command decision. His gaze moved from the podium to the back of the hangar. To me, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwell, would you join me, please? The words landed on the room like a controlled detonation. No fire, no shrapnel, just a shockwave that rearranged everything. Wendell's head turned, slowly. The rotation of a man whose internal compass had just lost magnetic north. I stood. I smoothed the front of my coat. I walked down the center aisle. My heels on the polished concrete were the only sound in that hangar. Each step measured, each step deliberate. The scar along my jaw caught the overhead light. The gray pin on my lapel was no longer invisible. General Reed saw me coming. He stepped from the podium, squared his shoulders, and saluted. Crisp. Formal. The kind of salute you give to a superior officer whose rank you respect. He didn't salute Wendell. He saluted me. I returned it. Major Wright extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, measured. Lieutenant Colonel, he said, it's an honor to have you with us today. Thank you, sir. He turned back to the microphone. Lieutenant Colonel Corinne Blackwell is a 20-year veteran of the United States Air Force. She has logged over 3,200 flight hours, including 400 in experimental aircraft, under programs so classified that her name was removed from every public database the Air Force maintains. She was one of 2 pilots selected for the Dark Star hypersonic program. She has maintained controlled flight above Mach 5 in an experimental scramjet airframe on 9 separate occasions. She has served in the Pacific Trials and in Project Midnight. She has briefed the Joint Chiefs. She carries the call sign, Sparrow. He paused. The pin on her lapel is not decoration. It is awarded to pilots who have done what most pilots cannot imagine. It has been earned by 7 people in history. She is one of them. The hangar was silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes the air feel thick. Janet Johnson's hand rose slowly to cover her mouth. Diane Smith sat perfectly still, her eyes wide, unblinking. Uncle Robert uncrossed his arms. His hands dropped to his knees like something had cut the strings holding them up. Wendell Blackwell did not move. His face had gone the color of the concrete beneath his shoes. His mouth was open. Not wide. Just enough. The jaw of a man whose internal engine had just seized. His Airline Mechanics Association pin caught the light on his lapel, and for the first time in his life, it looked small. General Reed's gaze swept across the front rows, across the Smiths, across the Johnsons, across Wendell. This hangar, he continued, his voice steady and unhurried, is being dedicated to the men and women of Lieutenant Colonel Blackwell's test unit. Not because they sought recognition, because they earned it in silence, at speeds and altitudes that would kill most people, in aircraft that don't officially exist, for a country that will never know their names. He turned to me. Ma'am, on behalf of the Air Force Test Center and the United States Air Force, it is my privilege to formally recognize your service. Major Wright stepped forward with the leather folder. He opened it. Inside was the dedication plaque, brass, engraved, the unit designation, my name, and beneath my name, in smaller letters, call sign, Sparrow. Wendell's hand moved to his chest, not to his heart, to his pin, his 40-year pin. He touched it once. Then his hand dropped, his shoulders followed. He sank back into the folding chair like a man who had just been shown an X-ray of something he couldn't fix. His mouth opened, then closed. You didn't, he said, barely above a whisper. The sound carried in that silent hangar like a stone dropped into still water. You didn't just work in D.C. The thing about silence is that it isn't always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. I held his gaze. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The 2 stars on General Reed's shoulders spoke for me. The salute spoke for me. The plaque spoke for me. 20 years of silence, pressed into a single moment where the truth didn't need volume. It just needed to arrive. Major Wright stepped to the microphone. He didn't introduce himself with rank or credential. He simply opened the leather folder to a second compartment, withdrew 3 pages of cream-colored paper, and held them under the light so the audience could see the handwriting. Steady. Careful. The handwriting of a nurse taking dictation from a woman whose hands could no longer hold a pen. Before the dedication concludes, he said, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwell has authorized me to read a letter. It was written by Susan Blackwell, dictated during her final week in hospice care, entrusted to her primary nurse, Sarah Hall, with instructions that it be placed directly and exclusively into her daughter's hands. He paused. His eyes moved to me. I gave him a single nod. He began, My dearest Corinne, if you're reading this, then Sarah kept her promise, and I kept mine. I promised myself I would never leave this world without telling you what I couldn't say out loud. Not because I was afraid, because I understood. I always understood. Wendell's posture changed. Not a collapse, a fracture. The slow, structural failure of a man hearing his dead wife's voice say things he never authorized. I know what you do. I have always known. Not the details, not the names or the numbers, but I know the sound of a daughter who carries weight she cannot put down. I know the way your hands shake after you've been somewhere you can't talk about. I know what that scar on your jaw cost you. I know you fly. Janet Johnson's hand pressed harder against her mouth. A sound escaped, something between a breath and a word that never formed. Your father doesn't understand. He may never understand. He measures love by proximity. He measures worth by what he can see and touch, and tighten with a wrench. But you and I, Corinne, we learned a long time ago that some things exist above the clouds where no one can see them, and that doesn't make them less real. It makes them sacred. The American flag above the stage hung perfectly still. Even the air had stopped moving. I am not heartbroken. I am not ashamed. I am proud of you in a way that has no edges, no conditions, no weight. I am proud of you the way the ground is proud of the sky. You are the bravest thing I ever made. Wright's voice held steady, professional, but his jaw tightened on the word made. Never stop flying, my sparrow. He closed the pages. He placed them back into the leather folder. He stepped away from the microphone. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of 70 people, recalculating everything they'd been told for 2 years. The silence of a room discovering that the foundation they'd been standing on was wet sand. Wendell sat in his folding chair. His hands were on his knees. His fingers had gone white. His mouth was working. Small movements, the mechanical stutter of a man trying to assemble words from parts that no longer fit together. She never, he started. Susan never said any of that to me. I looked at him. He looked back. She didn't need to, I said. That was when a reporter from the local affiliate stepped toward the edge of the stage. Young man, eager. He'd been filming the dedication for a regional piece and had clearly stumbled into something larger than a hangar naming. He turned to Wendell, microphone extended, because Wendell was closest, and reporters read proximity as relevance. Mr. Blackwell, can you comment on your daughter's service record? Were you aware of her role in the hypersonic program? Wendell's jaw set. The old reflex. The mechanic's reflex. When you don't know the answer, you talk louder about what you do know. I've worked on turbines my entire life, he said, leaning forward, his voice recovering its familiar authority. I know how scramjets work. The ignition sequence alone requires a fuel-air ratio that no pilot can manage manually. It's automated. She didn't fly anything. The computer flew it. She was just along for the ride. He said it to the reporter, but he said it for the room. General Reed didn't move. Major Wright's expression didn't change. They didn't need to respond. They both knew who would. I stepped to the edge of the stage. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need it. The hangar's acoustics carried a whisper to the back wall. The scramjet ignition sequence on a Dark Star airframe is not automated, Wendell. Fuel-air mixing at Mach 5 requires manual thermal override of the combustion chamber, because the automated sequencer can't compensate for boundary layer transition at variable angles of attack. The pilot initiates ignition by hand at a window of 1.4 seconds. Miss it, and the engine doesn't light. Miss it twice, and the airframe becomes a glider at 70,000 feet with no restart option. I paused. The computer doesn't fly it. I fly it. Wendell blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his hands, the hands of a man who understood machinery, the hands of a man who had just been told, in the precise technical language of his own trade, that his daughter operated at a level he couldn't diagram on his best day. The reporter lowered his microphone. General Reed turned to Wendell. His voice was level, not loud. Authority never needs volume. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwell is the reason our hypersonic program didn't end in a fireball over the Pacific. Step back, sir. Wendell's Airline Mechanics Association pin caught the light one last time. Then he collapsed. Slowly, he sank back into the folding chair, like a man whose internal structure had finally given way. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He just sat there, small and defeated, while the room realized he was the one who had lied. I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked toward the waiting transport. What I felt was altitude. As I exited the hangar, General Reed fell in step beside me. The April sunlight had warmed the concrete, and the air smelled like cut grass and jet fuel from the regional runway. He filed a complaint with the VA 6 weeks ago, Reed said, not looking at me. Looking at the sky the way pilots do when they're delivering difficult information. Claimed you were impersonating an officer. Used fraudulent credentials to gain access to classified programs. I said nothing. The Inspector General flagged it. We pulled the file. When they cross-referenced his complaint with your actual service record, the math didn't work in his favor. He paused. The false report is now under review. Depending on the determination, he could face federal charges. I'm not asking for that. No, but the process doesn't require your permission, Colonel. Filing a fraudulent stolen valor complaint against an active duty officer with top-secret clearance isn't a family disagreement. It's a federal matter. I let that settle. The weight of it, the quiet machinery of consequence, turning without anyone's hand on the wrench. There's something else, Reed said. He reached into his coat and produced a single sheet of paper. 3 operational security reviews were triggered by the complaint. His filing referenced enough details about your travel patterns that counterintelligence had to determine whether your cover had been compromised. I already knew. 2 non-disclosure protocols were breached in the investigation chain. 1 asset relocation was initiated as a precaution. Was anyone compromised? Not this time, but it was close. Closer than it should have been because a retired mechanic decided he knew more than he did. I exhaled. Not relief. Inventory. The kind of breath you take after a flight when you're confirming that all systems are nominal and the airframe is intact. His complaint has been formally rejected. Reed continued. The IG's office will notify him by mail. Whether the U.S. attorney pursues the false filing is outside my authority. He turned to me. What I can tell you, Colonel, is that your service record is clean. Your operational history is intact. And this hangar will carry your unit's name for as long as it stands. I looked at the building behind us. Steel and concrete, and the American flag still visible through the open bay door. A structure built to house aircraft that most people would never see. Named for pilots whose work happened above the clouds, in silence, at speeds the ground could barely measure. Thank you, sir. He nodded. Then he did something I did not expect. He reached into his pocket and produced a worn photograph. Small, creased at the corners. A woman in a hospital bed, smiling, holding a gray pin between her thumb and forefinger. Your mother sent this to my office 8 months before she passed. No return address, no letter. Just the photo and 3 words written on the back. He turned it over. She's still flying. My chest tightened. Not pain. Pressure. The kind you feel at altitude when the atmosphere thins and your body has to decide whether it's built for where it is. I took the photograph. I held it the way Sarah Hall had held the cream envelope in that parking lot 6 months ago. Like something that might shatter. Your mother was your ground control, Colonel. She always was. I placed the photograph inside my breast pocket, next to the letter. Next to the pin, the 3 points of a triangle that had held me steady through 20 years of silence. I didn't stay for the reception. I didn't approach the Smiths or the Johnsons. I didn't seek out Janet or Diane or Uncle Robert. I didn't owe them a correction. I didn't owe them a tour of my service record. The truth had been spoken from a podium by a two-star general and from a hospice bed by my mother. Anyone still choosing Wendell's version wasn't confused. They were comfortable. I didn't go to the reception, not out of spite, not out of pride, but because I no longer needed to step into a place that asked me to shrink. 3 weeks later, Janet Johnson called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 43 seconds long. She used the word sorry 4 times and the phrase, "We had no idea," 3 times. She did not use the phrase, "We should have asked." You didn't ask. That was the answer to every question they'd ever form. You weren't asking questions. You were digging graves. Wendell never called. Not once. The IG's letter arrived at his house by certified mail. I know because Major Wright confirmed the delivery signature, Wendell Blackwell, signed in his own hand, accepting receipt of a federal document informing him that his stolen valor complaint had been rejected and that his false filing was under review by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District. He told Uncle Robert it was a misunderstanding. He told the Johnsons the government was retaliating. He told anyone who would listen that the system was broken and that he was being punished for asking questions. The system wasn't broken. The system was precise. The system operated the same way I operated, quietly, without fanfare, with evidence instead of volume. 7 weeks after the dedication, the U.S. Attorney declined criminal prosecution. Not because the case lacked merit, because Wendell Blackwell was 68 years old, retired, and the damage had been contained. A formal letter of admonishment was placed in his file. His complaint was flagged in the federal database. If he ever filed another false report against military personnel, the next conversation would not be by mail. Wendell's 40-year reputation at the airline didn't survive the local news cycle. The reporter from the dedication had filed his story. It ran on a Thursday evening. The headline didn't mention Wendell by name. It didn't need to. Local hangar dedicated to classified Air Force unit told enough of the story that anyone who'd been in that room could fill in the rest. The Airline Mechanics Association rescinded his invitation to their annual banquet. Not formally. They just stopped sending the invitations. Wendell noticed in June. He called their chapter president 3 times. The 3rd call was not returned. That was the slow rot. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just the quiet withdrawal of a community from a man who had built his authority on a lie about his daughter. And the steady, unglamorous correction that follows when the lie is exposed and the truth has 2 stars on its shoulders. I didn't watch it happen. I didn't need to. I was flying. In May, I established the Susan Blackwell Memorial Flight Scholarship, funded through a trust administered by the Air Force Academy Foundation, awarded annually to a woman entering military aviation training. No press conference, no ceremony. Just a document filed with the foundation, a funding transfer, and a name that would appear each year on a letter received by a young woman who wanted to fly and needed someone to tell her she could. The first recipient was selected in August. I never met her. I didn't need to. The scholarship wasn't about me. It was about a woman in a hospital bed who held a gray pin between her fingers and smiled because she understood what it meant before I ever explained it. I work at Edwards now, not as a cover, not as a consultant. As Lieutenant Colonel Corinne Blackwell, test pilot, Dark Star Hypersonic Program. My office is inside a CIF 3 levels below ground. My name is on the door. No titles on the placard, no medals on the wall. Just Corinne. Most mornings I arrive before sunrise. I badge through 4 security checkpoints. I change into a flight suit in a locker room that smells like hydraulic fluid and recycled air. I walk across a tarmac that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The desert air so dry it cracks your lips before you reach the hangar. And when I climb into the cockpit of a Dark Star prototype, when I strap in and seal the canopy and feel the scramjet spool behind me like a held breath, I touch two things: the photograph in my flight suit pocket and the small gray pin on my collar. The horizon curves below me. The sky turns black. The airframe shudders as it crosses the thermal boundary, and the instruments glow amber, and the altimeter reads numbers that don't belong to the ground. I am Lieutenant Colonel Corinne Blackwell, call sign Sparrow. 20 years of service, 3,200 flight hours, 9 flights above Mach 5, one mother who knew, one letter that proved it. I am no longer missing. There is power in patience. There is freedom in truth, even when it comes late. And there is a kind of silence that isn't absence. It is altitude. It is the space above the noise, where the air is thin and the sky is black, and the only sound is the engine and your own steady breathing, and the knowledge that you were built for exactly where you are. I didn't stay away because I didn't love her, Wendell. I stayed away so you could sleep under a sky that wasn't burning. Mom knew. That was enough. It was always enough. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.